Hey everyone, welcome to week three. Class is just flying along halfway through at this point, maybe a little more actually. I've really been enjoying all of your discussion posts. Our theme for this week is scientific, quantified, and moral eating. We look at one of the biggest shifts in the history of diet and the history of health, which is food becomes numerical. And we start to see ideas about diet and health now fundamentally shaped in terms of numbers. Up to this point in the course, if you've been paying any attention, it'll be totally obvious that everything we've talked about has been about balance, about temperament. It's deeply individual and entirely qualitative, right? Based on qualities. There's no math, there's no measurement, there's no experiments. There might be some medical experience that was useful, like give someone a particular kind of food or diet and see how they respond to it. You learn from that experience, but no experiments in this way that we think of them now. That world is over. This week, when we get to the mid 19th century, we really kind of start focusing on the late 19th century, but it was in the 1860s, 70s. You'll see this in the readings for this week, where people start for the first time to apply chemistry, which was a relatively new science, to food and to understand really what food does in the body, how it interacts with each other, what it's made out of, and think about sort of the idea of energy as applied to food and how it fuels human movement and how it produces relationships between disease and health and so on. So from this point forward, late 19th century, early 20th century, nutrition, diet, health becomes fundamentally a question of calories and macronutrients. And eventually in the 1910s, 1920s, vitamins, minerals, discovering these very particular chemical compounds that our body needs, or we get a specific disease. It's just a remarkable shift from sort of the individualistic, qualitative approach that we've seen in all of our readings and all of our primary sources up to this point. It's just absolutely impossible to overstate what a difference it was. And this week really takes us back to the very first day of the class where we read about the quantification of diet. And it was kind of setting us up to think about how our system of diet is really quite distinct from how other people have thought about it historically. And now we're seeing that shift unfold historically. So that's what this week is about and trying to understand why that's going on. And more importantly, what the implications are, because we live in this world of dietary numbers and nutritional research and quantified advice. And we have a really different, going back to week one, reading again, rhetoric. We have a really different way of talking about diet and health because we have these numbers and we have a way of quantifying how much you're supposed to eat, how much is good, how much is healthy, or how much is not healthy. It's a really different way of talking about it. It's a really different way of thinking about it. So I hope you'll enjoy seeing it all unfold this week. One core tension that I want you to keep in mind as we go through the readings this week, both on Monday and Tuesday, getting numerical in terms of food and diet and health didn't mean getting neutral. Even as we have more seemingly objective research and measurement about what is in food and how it interacts with our bodies, even though it seems to be more objective, as opposed to the very obviously moralistic advice we saw in Graham and even Cheney to some extent, it's easy to think that that kind of filters out as you get more objective and as you get more numbers, and the numbers sort of take that away. But that's actually not at all what happens. What happens is that people use the rhetoric of quantification, the rhetoric of numbers. This is what we talked about in the first day, to express similar kinds of moral visions for what society should be like. Even as dietary advice became more quantified, it kept doing the same kind of moral work that it had been doing. So we saw this in Graham explicitly. He's not talking about science and numbers and so on. He's making a very moral argument about how we should eat because it will make us healthy, but also because it's better for us. We'd be better people if we ate according to his very austere, bland diet. Not happier necessarily, but we'd be more likely to be saved in the end. So now we start to see for this week, especially on Tuesday, instead of preaching temperance like Graham did, reformers hand you a number and say, this is what you should have. And it seems very objective, it seems very health oriented, but there's often a moral component. Okay, a really quick roadmap for what we're doing this week, just to connect the different topics as we go through the days. This is the overview video. There'll be short other ones just to introduce the topics in a little bit more detail, hopefully not too much. We'll see. On Monday, we look at how quantification works as a source of authority. We look at the USDA in the 1910s, 1920s, and they're using research, new nutrition research, laboratories. They're setting up their own laboratories. They're using other laboratories to gather information about what constitutes a healthy diet, what defines health, what should people be eating. They want to give official advice about how to make a strong nation through diet and health. But there's a lot of implications to that. Now we have a government, right? Official institutions quantifying the American eater. So we lose all the individual kind of dietary advice that we've reading about up until now, and people get kind of binned into these different categories. You're a worker, you're a housewife, you're a kid, you're this, that, and the other thing. And so here's the statistical averages. Here's what you should be eating. Here's what you should be eating. And of course, just like an average height, like nobody's actually the average height. Everyone's more or less. So we're giving dietary advice, which in general kind of makes statistical sense, but it also doesn't really fully apply to the huge range of individuals and individual bodies. On Tuesday, we look at what I was just talking about a second ago, which is how even though we have increasingly objective science and nutritional research, or supposedly objective, it gets used in a very particular moral way. And we'll see this with what's called the New England Kitchen and how social reformers are telling especially immigrants how to eat, how to be more American, how to be more patriotic. And it's not qualitative advice. It's not you should eat this kind of food or this kind of food. It's you should eat this much protein. You should spend this much on carbohydrates versus fats. And it's very regimented in the language of science, the rhetoric of science for social reform. Incredibly powerful. So we see that on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we read our primary source for this week, Wilbur Atwater. He's popularizing ideas about nutrition that are new in the article from 1887, published in Century Magazine, a hugely popular magazine at the time. He's introducing really crazy technical terms to people like carbohydrate and calorie and protein, which no one really talked about these things at all. And he had to explain, from the ground up what these were. So he's a really fun character to read. And one of the things I want you to think about, as with all our primary sources, is to what extent do you agree with the authors from Monday and Tuesday? They talk about Atwater a lot and they analyze what he's doing. Do you agree with them? When you read the primary source, when you read Atwater for yourself, and he's very readable, very, very readable, does it mesh with what the historians have said? Do you have a different take? Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? So that's it for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the kind of the reading progression for the week. Thursday, we have another sort of application day where you compare 3 different primary sources. I'll say more about this in the Wednesday video because it's more proximate to the assignment. But again, it's another chance for you to apply what you've learned the first couple of days this week to primary sources and use the whole course actually to analyze the differences between them. On Friday, we have a different kind of assignment. I'll say more about that in the Wednesday video. Basically, I'm giving you some slides and asking you to sort of narrate them in terms of the course, using a little AI help to kind of get some historical context and get started. But the idea is, what can you do with a set of slides that talk about the kind of issues or that visually represent the kind of issues we've been talking about? How would you apply the course to kind of better analyze those? So we'll see how that goes. I'm certainly looking forward to it. Have a great week.